So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, it's a given that solar is the cheapest way to generate electricity. Cost for installed solar and battery systems vary widely around the world, but the U.S. is just about the most expensive, except maybe on the moon. And it's been like this for many years. So back in 2007, I traveled to Germany with a good friend, Jeff Brown, to find out why costs for installed solar systems were less than half than those in the U.S. We drove all over Germany, and even sometimes at high speeds. We visited over a dozen solar installations. We couldn't find out the reason for the high costs until our last day in Germany. I asked a well-known installer how much paperwork involved in a typical German residential solar installation. He said, "Paperwork? What is paperwork?" In 2012, Todd Woody with Forbes magazine wrote an article about what we had learned in Germany. The key conclusion at the time: U.S. costs were much higher due to the paperwork and red tape in the U.S. compared to Germany. Now, here's a picture of all the documents were required for a simple solar installation in San Francisco. That was 2012. But recently I've been hearing that solar and battery costs in Australia are 1/4 the costs than those in the U.S. Now, that sounded incredible to me. U.S. costs seem to have gotten even more expensive on a worldwide basis. So I spent the first few days of my vacation this year in Australia and New Zealand, checking out rooftop solar and battery installations my wife put up with me. We collected a lot of data from installers, websites, and we got a lot of help from Franklin WH. So here's a high-level comparison of solar only and solar and battery costs between Australia and the U.S. in January 2026. Now, these are costs for quality equipment installed by established contractors. These are not DIY installations. These are not, the absolute cheapest thing you can get. And these costs include all the necessary paperwork that's done in Australia and the U.S. And we also adjusted for the Australian-U.S. dollar exchange rate. So let's compare the costs between the U.S. and Australia. In Australia, solar with applicable incentives is 1/4 of the price of U.S. solar. In Australia, a complete solar and battery system is also 1/4 the price of a complete system in the U.S. Now, 20 years ago, solar in Germany was half the price of the U.S. And in 2007, most of that difference was due to paperwork. U.S. costs have gotten much worse compared to world solar leaders. It almost seems as if someone or something or some entity is trying to increase solar costs. So to understand where these differences are, let's break down the two major cost components. Now, in the solar industry, we consider two types of costs: soft costs and hard costs. Basically, we have hardware costs or hard costs, including things like equipment, solar panels, racking, batteries, inverters, wire, conduit, etc. And then we have soft costs, pretty much everything else, including installation labor, office labor, distribution, tariffs and duties, permits and inspections, utility interconnections, sales and marketing costs, which we refer to as customer acquisition costs, overhead, rent, insurance, sales tax, income tax, and at the end, maybe some profits left over for the company if they expect to stay in business. So as you can see, the hardware costs and direct labor costs, and we kind of lump those together in an accounting standpoint here in the U.S., we call that COGS, cost of goods sold. Those COGS are twice as high in the U.S. compared to Australia. And the soft costs are 4 times as high in the U.S. compared to Australia. Here's some background on these discussions and what we did about it. About 15 years ago, installers in the United States marshaled their efforts to cut back on paperwork. Now, hats off to Andrew Birch and his team at SolarApp. They really pushed hard to come up with a way to automate as many of these permitting and soft cost tasks as possible. This system eliminates delays by reducing times to get permits from 1 month to sometimes less than a day. Once the building plans are put together, they can be electronically submitted and automatically approved. It makes a tremendous difference. Now, the California Solar and Storage Association helped pass California laws mandating this automated permitting. It took a long time to get in place. We finally got it in place. And now most cities in California have to follow these rules, and many other states are following suit. Now, it's much easier all around the country to get solar and battery permits with Solar App and then another similar product called Symbian. Plus, some cities, like San Jose, have their own fast permitting process. So in most cities, we can get instant online permits. And you know what that means? At the end of 2025, when we were slammed with business, we couldn't wait 2 or 3 months to get a permit for some jurisdictions, for some cities. We basically just told our salespeople, tell those people we'll come back next year when the prices are higher, but there's no way we can get their systems done in time. Instead, we focused on all the cities that had automated permitting, and it made a really big difference. So my friends Jigar and Saul Griffith also talk a lot about ridiculously high U.S. solar and battery costs. Realistically, we're falling further and further behind. Just saying the costs are really high doesn't really help figure out how to reduce them. So to a large degree, we've solved kind of, in retrospect, that it wasn't easy, but some of the more straightforward permitting and cost problems. But there are much bigger reasons why the costs in the U.S. for solar are so high. We need to directly confront these high cost factors. We can't just say they're bad. We have to figure out how to solve them and point our fingers at what the problems are and then address those. So here are the largest cost difference factors. Number one, manufacturing policies. And these are often tariff based. So the U.S. creates tariffs to improve manufacturing, but it's backfiring. U.S. labor and overhead costs are higher than most places around the world. That's okay. It's okay for commodity products like solar panels, aluminum racking, and batteries, especially if it's something that we can manufacture at scale. The problem is the U.S. manufacturing policies are ridiculously short-sighted. For example, you can't make inexpensive solar panels in the U.S. if the key ingredients, such as solar cells, have really high tariffs. And you can't build fully automated factories if the automation equipment carries high tariffs and the engineers and the people that need to train it aren't allowed to come into the United States because of immigration issues. The U.S., as a result, I've been watching this happen for 20 years. The U.S. flip-flops on manufacturing policies incentives every 4 years. A new administration comes in, out with the old promotions and tariffs and tax credits, and in with the new. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What happens is the best solar and battery manufacturers in the world, they're reluctant to risk expansion in the U.S. Biggest manufacturer in the world say, hey, we're just going to keep manufacturing overseas and we're going to put a big tariff on it, and that's tough luck. So now let's talk about regulations. Yes, U.S. labor costs are high, but for automated manufacturing projects, this is not the biggest barrier. However, many construction regulations add huge costs to solar and battery installations. I won't get into some of the newer ones that are happening in California, which were restricting solar installers, but let's just look at things like the rapid shutdown requirements. These are requirements that mandate optimizers, microinverters, or other electronics to eliminate high rooftop voltages. These requirements are unique to the U.S. Yes, they improve safety by a tiny bit, but there's better ways to do it, and these components end up being pretty expensive. Next, every solar and battery installation requires one or more inspections. These are regulations. You have to have the system inspected. Now, these inspections include fire inspection, structural, building electrical, and utility inspection. I think one inspection is a good idea. It's useful to make sure that the system is installed as designed and it's safe. But multiple inspections add delays, significant costs, and confusion because you might pass 3 inspections and the last inspection, they fail for some reason and you have to change everything. It's terrible. Now, the worst regulations, don't even get me started. Well, I guess you have. Worst regulations are the interconnection requirements. These are rules created by utilities to limit or completely prevent solar and battery connections to the grid. In the U.S., these interconnection delays add several months and thousands of dollars to almost every solar and battery installation. They also require some special requirements of the system that aren't really the code. Now think about it. In the U.S., We have the biggest competitor to home and business solar is the utility, and they get to limit and delay every installation. How is that going to streamline costs? No, it just increases them. Okay, the next big category are what I call tax, finance, and business policies. We have sales taxes as well as state and federal income taxes in the U.S. Sometimes these taxes don't apply. Sometimes in Europe, for example, they have a value-added tax. I haven't really compared it that much. But when I looked down at Australia, the taxes were much lower. There was just some sales taxes, which are comparable to what we have in California. Now, the next thing, from a policy standpoint, tax credits have generated tremendous growth in the U.S. solar and battery industry since 2006. Now, unfortunately, the Trump administration ended these credits in 2025. We took what was really good policy for home and business energy, and now we've created terrible policy. Solar financing is one area where the biggest savings can be quickly achieved. Some countries have national low or no interest solar financing programs. The German KfW Bank provides cheap and easy solar financing. It's a one-page document. You sign up for it, you get the financing, you get the interconnection, you're done. Now, we tried some easy national financing things like PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, and the Green Bank in the US. But here's what happened. Competing financing interests, many of which were solar finance companies themselves, that killed these lower financing cost programs. So it was a bummer. PACE was killed by another solar company. The Green Bank is suppressed by fossil fuel interests. So it's really hard to kind of get these things really through. Now, instead of simple or low-cost customer financing in the U.S., we rely on complicated third-party ownership structures that actually increase system costs and often double the tax credit contributions made by the federal government. For example, with this financing, if you were to put the system in yourself a few years ago, you might get a $12,000 tax credit. But when that goes through this complicated system where there's higher sales costs and escalated fair market value, depreciation, higher tax credits, the amount of money that the federal government contributes is often double or more what an individual consumer would make. So we've created all this extra bureaucracy. A bunch of other companies are making money on it, and the cost of solar for homes and businesses, is not as low as it should be. The last category, direct tariffs and duties, add thousands of dollars to every solar installation. On Liberation Day in 2025, I don't know who was being liberated. It certainly wasn't the consumer. Whimsical and artificial costs were added to virtually every single component that goes into a solar and battery installations. Now, these tariffs were even worse than the well-intentioned but terribly designed tariffs that were implemented to encourage domestic solar manufacturing. And these are just like, hey, let's just tariff everything. So many people or many parts of the solar industry had tariffs on individual components. The tariffs were higher on imported products so that they could incentivize domestic manufacturing. The problem was that domestic manufacturing never took off because the manufacturers figured these policies would change. So kind of bottom line, we're fooling ourselves if we think that reducing solar installation paperwork can significantly reduce total system costs. Over the past 15 years, tariffs, regulations, interconnection requirements, and bad manufacturing policies have made it more expensive to install solar, haven't reduced costs. And where are these things coming from? They're coming from competing energy suppliers, particularly fossil fuel companies and utilities. They continue to suppress customer-owned solar and storage. The fossil fuel companies are contributing billions and billions of dollars to certain parts of our government to get their policies implemented. The solar industry does not have that kind of clout, and we're just kind of fighting for crumbs. So let's kind of take a look and summarize the most effective national policy changes. Here's what we can do to really reduce costs down to Australia or where Europe is. First, eliminate tariffs. High tariffs on components mean expensive finished equipment. Now, you could also say, hey, let's put tariffs on oil and gas and competing products. No, I'm not suggesting that. Let's just have a clean slate, level playing field. Let's eliminate all the tariffs on everything that's related to manufacturing solar and battery systems and getting those installed. Second, eliminate the interconnection requirements for all systems on homes for less than 15 kilowatts. Maybe for bigger systems that could actually have an impact of what's going on the grid, you might need some interconnection requirements. But for 15 kilowatt systems, it's de minimis. It's not going to make a big difference at all. After all, if you put in a new air conditioner or put in an EV charger or put in a heat pump in your house and you're going to use more power, the utility doesn't ask you for permission. They're like, hey, great, go ahead, love it. We'd love to sell you more power. But if you try and put in solar, which is going to reduce the power draw on the grid, reduce your purchase from the utility, they crack down on that. All right. Third, we have to try to engineer around construction and safety regulations. We're not going to make those go away, and they're there for a good reason. You can't eliminate safety regulations. You have to figure out what's unsafe and you have to fix it. We're kind of going through that right now with balcony solar. These regulations are really too embedded in thousands of city, state, and local laws, regulations, UL requirements. They're too embedded to change locally. So we got to engineer around them. And finally, we need to create a simple and cheap national financing program like the Green Bank. We've tried, we know how to do it, and we just have to stand up to the interests that keep saying don't do it. Meanwhile, we should continue to do what we're doing, which is really good, continue state by state permitting, regulation, and interconnection reforms, and we should restore the residential clean energy credits. That's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks for joining me, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Energy Show.